For the best experience, put on your headphones and listen closely. Some things are only heard in the silence of the night. If you find yourself holding your breath at any point in this story, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're ready for more tales that haunt the night, subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for new videos every week. I've traveled a lot for work over the years. Some places are beautiful. Some are boring. And others, well, they stick with you in ways you don't expect. There's one place that still creeps into my thoughts at night. The Bellwood Inn, a rundown hotel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. But what happened to me there? Well, let's just say that sometimes the real monsters are the ones we can see. It started as just another business trip. Long meetings, corporate dinners, and the endless cycle of checking in and out of hotels. The Bellwood Inn wasn't my first choice, but everything else was fully booked. It had a cheap, no-frills appeal. The kind of place you just use for a bed to crash and nothing more. But from the moment I walked through the front door, something about it felt off. The Bellwood Inn was old, the kind of place where the wallpaper has been peeling for decades, and the carpets are worn down to the threads. There was a strange, musty odor that greeted me as soon as I entered, like damp wood and stale air. The lobby was dimly lit, with one flickering light above the front desk. The receptionist, an older man with deep-set eyes and a face like he'd given up on smiling a long time ago, handed me my room key without a word. His hand trembled as he passed it over, his eyes avoiding mine. The elevator creaked as it ascended, groaning under its own weight. My room was on the third floor, down a narrow, poorly lit hallway. The lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting long shadows on the stained walls. It was eerily quiet. No other guests seemed to be staying there, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the elevator returning to the lobby. When I opened the door to my room, a strange sense of isolation washed over me. The room was basic. A single bed, a worn-out dresser, and a small TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The window overlooked the parking lot, but it was dirty, grimy, making it hard to see anything outside. Something about the silence of the place made me uneasy. It wasn't just the lack of noise, but a kind of oppressive quiet that seemed to press down on me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the exhaustion from travel. But as I unpacked my things and prepared for bed, that feeling of being watched crept in. I wasn't particularly paranoid or fearful by nature. In fact, I considered myself pretty rational, but life had been throwing me curveballs. My marriage was on the rocks. My wife and I were barely speaking anymore. Work was a grind, and I felt like I was constantly teetering on the edge of burnout. The stress weighed heavily on me, and this trip felt like a brief escape, even if it was just for work. But that night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, I started to feel that maybe I wasn't just running from my problems. Maybe I was running into something worse. I tried to rationalize the strange atmosphere. Old buildings always creak and groan, and weird smells aren't uncommon in places like this. Still, something in the back of my mind wouldn't let go. I had the overwhelming sense that someone, or something, was watching me. The first few hours were uneventful, but the longer I stayed in that room, the stranger things became. It started small. I noticed that the door lock didn't seem right. When I turned the knob, the lock clicked like it was engaged. But when I pulled on the door gently, it shifted just slightly, like it wasn't fully secure. I chalked it up to faulty maintenance, but it nagged at me. Then came the sounds. At first it was just a faint noise, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. A soft clicking sound, almost rhythmic. It seemed to be coming from the hallway outside. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the pipes or the building settling, but as I lay in bed, the noise grew louder, and it was no longer just a clicking. It sounded like footsteps, slowed, deliberate, pacing outside my room. I got up and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I stepped back and sat on the bed again, trying to calm my nerves, but the footsteps resumed, this time closer, like they were just outside my door. My heart started to race. I thought about calling the front desk, but something stopped me. I didn't want to seem paranoid, didn't want to admit that this rundown hotel was getting to me. So I locked the door, checked it again and again, and tried to convince myself that it was nothing. At around 2 a.m., the real fear set in. I woke up to the sound of scratching, right at the base of the door. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I sat up in bed, listening, my breath shallow. The scratching was persistent, like someone was gently dragging their nails across the wood. I stayed frozen, barely able to breathe. My eyes locked on the door. It wasn't a rat or an animal. It was deliberate, measured. My mind raced. Was someone trying to break in? Was it just some sick prank? I slowly crept to the door, pressed my ear against it, and heard the faintest whisper. "I know you're in there." A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone, dialing the front desk. But no one answered. I tried again. Nothing. Complete silence. I stood in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do next. Then I heard it. The door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp, and braced myself. The handle rattled violently now, shaking the door. My hands were slick with sweat, the lamp trembling in my grip. And then, silence. For what felt like hours, I stood there, waiting for the next sound, for the next movement, but nothing came. Slowly, I lowered the lamp, breathing hard, my pulse in my ears. I told myself it was over, that whoever was out there had gone, but then I saw it, through the crack in the door, just below the handle, a shadow moving slowly, back and forth. Someone was still there. I left the hotel at first light. I didn't even bother going to the front desk. I grabbed my things, threw them in my car, and sped away from that place. But that sense of dread has never left me. I still hear it sometimes, the scratching at the door. That soft, deliberate voice whispering, "I know you're in there." The thing that haunts me the most. It wasn't a ghost, a spirit, or some paranormal force. It was something much worse, someone real. If that story gave you chills, hit the like button. And if you've ever felt that creeping fear like someone was watching you, share your experience in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Scary Tales for more stories like this, because sometimes reality is more terrifying than we think. But as unsettling as that story was, it's not the only one I know. Let me tell you about a place that's even stranger. The Cedar Inn, an abandoned hotel that still haunts me to this day. The Cedar Inn was different from the Bellwood. It wasn't in the middle of a bustling town or perched on a busy roadside. No, this one sat in complete isolation, deep in the mountains, miles from any civilization. It was the kind of place you had to want to find. Forgotten by time and left to rot. Its once elegant wooden structure was now broken down, a skeleton of what it used to be. It had been closed for years after a fire had destroyed most of the interior. Yet it stood stubbornly against the elements. The entrance was covered in thick vines, with only small patches of the old wooden sign visible beneath the overgrowth. The wind whistled through the cracks in the windows, carrying with it the smell of mold and something metallic, something like blood. Inside, the hotel felt like it was holding its breath. Every step I took echoed through the lobby, as if the place was listening to me. Unlike the first hotel I mentioned, there was no warm light from chandeliers or flickering lamps. The Cedar Inn was dark, cold, and utterly still. The air was thick with dust, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot like they might give way at any moment. And yet, in spite of how empty it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was there. I hadn't come to the Cedar Inn on a whim. My brother David had gone missing 3 years ago after checking in. He had always been the adventurous one, the kind of guy who loved ghost hunting and seeking out abandoned places. When he heard about the inn, he couldn't resist. The police found his car parked outside, but there was no trace of him inside the hotel, just his belongings scattered across one of the rooms. The authorities ruled it a disappearance, but no one knew what really happened. I never believed the stories about the place, stories about people vanishing, about time slipping away inside its walls, but I had to find answers. And if there was any chance, even a slim one, that David was still there, I had to know. As I stood in the empty lobby, staring at the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture, I felt the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. I was alone, and the silence around me was suffocating. I pulled out my phone, but just like in every horror movie, there was no signal. Typical. But I wasn't about to turn back. Not yet. At first, it was just the wind, the faint howl of the breeze slipping through the broken windows, the soft creak of wood shifting in the foundation, but soon the quiet gave way to something else, A distant sound, almost like footsteps, coming from the upper floors. I told myself it was probably the wind knocking something loose, or an animal scurrying through the ruins, but the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, steadier, as if someone was walking, no, pacing above me. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. There was no one else here. Right. The footsteps stopped abruptly. I exhaled, a nervous laugh escaping me. I was being paranoid, but then I heard a door creak open, slowly, like someone was standing just behind it, waiting for me. I turned my head toward the staircase, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. That's when I saw it. At the top of the stairs, the shadow of a figure, just standing there, watching. My heart raced, and I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the shadow was gone. The air inside the Cedar Inn felt heavier. The deeper I ventured, each room I passed told a story. Burnt furniture, singed wallpaper, and personal items left behind in a hurry, as though people had fled in terror, leaving everything behind. But it was the subtle things that got to me. A doll on the floor of a child's room, untouched by fire, its glass eyes reflecting the dim light, filtering through a crack in the ceiling or a mirror in one of the bedrooms, perfectly clean, as if someone had just polished it that morning, even though no one had been here in years. Then I found it. Room 202, the last room my brother stayed in. The door was half open, and the hinges creaked. As I pushed it aside, inside, the room was eerily preserved. His backpack was still on the bed, clothes neatly folded beside it, and his phone sat on the nightstand, untouched. Everything was just as he'd left it, except for one thing, the mirror on the wall. It wasn't like the others. It was large, cracked down the center, and it didn't reflect the room properly. As I looked into it, I noticed something strange. The reflection was of the room, but it was different, almost distorted, as if I was looking at it through a warped lens. And then I saw movement in the reflection. Behind me, the door to the room slowly closed. I spun around, heart pounding, but the door was wide open, empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by something that wasn't quite human. But it wasn't until I saw the journal that things took a turn for the worse. It was lying on the floor near the bed, its pages worn and yellowed. The cover was blank. But when I opened it, my brother's handwriting was there, clear as day. He had been documenting his stay, noting strange occurrences, noises in the night, doors opening and closing on their own, and most disturbing of all, the sense that someone was following him. The last entry was unfinished. I've seen it. He had written, "It's been watching me. It doesn't want me to leave." The page was smeared, the ink running like he had been interrupted mid-sentence. And then I felt it. Cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned, heart pounding, expecting to see the figure from the mirror standing right behind me, but there was no one there, just the silence and the unmistakable sense that something was in the room with me. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled. It stayed locked, trapping me inside. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker, thicker, as if the room itself was alive. And in the mirror, I saw it again. A figure, standing just behind me, watching with empty, hollow eyes. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was outside, gasping for air, the morning sun just starting to rise over the mountains. I looked back at the hotel, its windows dark and empty, like eyes that had seen too much. But even now, I can still feel it, that cold breath on my neck, the weight of unseen eyes following me. Everywhere I go, the Cedar Inn took my brother, and I think it nearly took me too. If you've ever experienced something that left you feeling watched, share your story in the comments below. And if you think you know what really happened at the Cedar Inn, let me know your thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, someone else will come forward with answers. And as if that wasn't enough, there's another hotel that still gives me nightmares. But this one wasn't abandoned. No, it was worse. It was open for business. The Midtown Lodge was one of those places that looked normal at first glance. Situated in a small town just off the highway, it wasn't the kind of place you'd associate with horror stories. No eerie towers, no broken windows, no creaky floorboards. It was just average. The kind of hotel you'd stop at when you were too tired to drive any further. A pit stop before continuing your journey the next day. I arrived late one evening after a long drive, exhausted from hours on the road. It was raining, of course. It always seems to rain when these things happen, doesn't it? The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered here and there, their headlights dim in the steady downpour. The neon sign blinked vacancy in an unsettling rhythm, cutting through the rain with its flickering light. The lobby was quiet, too quiet. A woman sat behind the front desk, her face hidden behind the glowing screen of a computer. She barely looked up as she handed me my room key, her voice flat and mechanical as she gave me directions to the room. I figured she was just tired like I was. I didn't think much of it at the time. But as I made my way down the long, dimly lit hallway to my room, I started to feel it. Something was off. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally against the walls. The air was too still, too cold, and the smell, it was faint but unmistakable. The heavy scent of bleach mixed with something metallic or almost like rust. I wasn't staying at the Midtown Lodge by choice. I was on my way to a conference for work and had gotten delayed on the road. I wasn't expecting luxury, just a bed, a shower, and a decent night's sleep before driving the last leg in the morning. I was already tense, deadlines looming, bills piling up, and a boss who seemed to find fault in everything I did. That kind of stress keeps you on edge, always looking for the next thing to go wrong. But what happened that night had nothing to do with work. No, this was something else, something far worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I walked down the hall, that sense of someone or something lurking just out of sight was overpowering. I brushed it off as exhaustion. Surely that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the nagging sense of unease only grew stronger as I approached my room, room 108. I'll never forget it. The room looked normal enough. A standard hotel setup, bed, small desk, TV mounted on the wall. But there was something wrong with it, an unexplainable heaviness that filled the air the moment I stepped inside. The temperature felt off. It wasn't cold exactly, but the kind of chill that makes your skin prickle, as though the room had been abandoned for days, despite the fact that it was clearly made up for a guest. I dropped my bag on the bed and turned to close the door, but it wouldn't latch. I tried again, pulling it hard and checking the lock, but the door wouldn't close fully no matter what I did. I shoved it a third time, harder, and it finally clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The rain had picked up outside, tapping against the window in an erratic rhythm. I thought about turning on the TV to drown out the sound, but something stopped me. Instead, I found myself staring at the door, my hand hovering over the lock. I heard it then, faint but clear, a scraping sound like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from inside the closet. I stood there, frozen, listening. The scraping sound was slow, deliberate, and it seemed to grow louder the longer I stayed still. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a mouse or some kind of animal trapped inside. I tried to rationalize it, but the sound, it was too precise, too human. I reached for the closet door handle, my heart pounding in my chest, every instinct telling me to stop, to leave. But I couldn't. I had to see what was making that noise. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I flicked on the light, my breath catching in my throat. The closet was empty, but the scratching sound continued. It wasn't coming from inside the closet. It was coming from behind the wall. I stepped back, my pulse racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was hearing. The sound moved, shifting along the wall, from one side of the room to the other, as though something or someone was crawling through the walls. The thought of it sent a chill down my spine. I backed away, my hand gripping the door handle, ready to run. But before I could move, there was a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. I froze. There was no one else staying in the hotel, at least not that I'd seen. The front desk had been empty when I'd passed by. My room was at the far end of the hallway. There was no reason for anyone to be here, especially not at this hour. The knocks came again, louder this time. I swallowed hard, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. I opened it slowly, expecting to see someone, anyone standing there. But the hallway was empty. Nothing but flickering lights and silence. And then I saw it. On the floor, just outside my door, was a photograph. I picked it up, my breath catching in my throat as I realized what I was looking at. It was a picture of me, standing in the hallway, holding the door open, just like I was now. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. No. It was the figure standing behind me in the photograph. A dark, shadowy figure, its face obscured, watching me from the corner of the room. I spun around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. No one was there. I didn't stay long enough to find out what was happening. I grabbed my things and left, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I ran down the hallway, through the lobby, and out into the rain, I didn't care that my car was still soaked. I just drove. But as I looked back in my rearview mirror, I swear I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway of the Midtown Lodge, watching me leave. I don't know who or what it was, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that it followed me. Even now, miles away, I sometimes find photographs slipped under my door, and in every single one, I'm not alone. Have you ever stayed somewhere that left you with chills like that? If so, share your experience in the comments below. And tell me, what do you think was in that hotel?